All right, welcome back everyone to my channel. This is Y Ray Rector back again. So my second video, this is going to be a little bit off the rails. All right. So my first video was like a Minecraft video. Now it's about the MBTI. So you may ask, what is the MBTI? What is this? Well, essentially, this is a psychological kind of framework for personality types. All right. So think about personality types, right? Some people are one type, some people are another type, some people are this or that, whatever. The MBTI is one of the typology systems that uh, kind of categorizes people into these 16 different clouds, or types, really. I call them clouds, that kind of explain their behaviors and thoughts and, receiving functions and decisive behaviors. So this is going to be a simple and brief presentation on how these simple four letters work by an ENTP male. So yes, I'm an ENTP. Uh, so I'm going to make more MBTI videos in the future. So I want this video to be the main video, the main lesson for everyone for watching my other MBTI videos, because this is the framework and my own reasoning for this framework, which is going to be important because there might be some bias in terms of defining functions, as there's no really official definition. All right. Down here, basically, this says that I did not take inspiration from anyone making this video at all. So everything used in this video, everything said is completely made by me. Okay, so don't worry about like piracy or whatever. Not piracy. Um, it's called something else. Plagiarism. That's right. Yes. Do not worry about that. All right. So, and if there is like anyone who wants to complain about that, just go ahead and try to contact me. All right. Disclaimer. So, like I said, the MBTI is a framework that categorizes people into 16 types. If you put that out there in society, do you think everyone's going to agree with that? No, absolutely not. In fact, many people strongly disagree with this. And it's kind of crazy to see this. It's like going up to someone who their whole life was raised thinking that candy was good for you, right? And then you tell them candy is bad for you. All of a sudden, they're like, "What are you talking about? This is nonsense." Because they were not exposed to this kind of system as much. And in fact, they kind of related to astrology or horoscopes. Yes, people relate the MBTI to horoscopes. It's insane, and I find it really humorous. And it's baffling, not only humorous but baffling, because people don't take the time to study this. There's a lot to study and a lot to know about the MBTI. How can one go out there speaking fake news about the MBTI and not even know about it? Talk about some sort of closed-mindedness. But anyway, that's just a big disclaimer out there. A lot of people hate this, especially scientists. They prefer the big five because it satisfies, you know, there's negative traits and positive traits. There's negative traits about the MBTI types as well, but you actually have to study it. You cannot just look at it, take a glance, and then say, oh, okay, nice. Unless you really know what you're talking about and studying it like you should be. People take assessments and they get different answers because they choose different answers for each question every time. So, of course, you're going to get different types. Plus, you're not supposed to take the assessments in the first place. You're actually supposed to just take time to study cognitive functions. And this video is going to actually be that resource for all of you watching this so you can actually understand the cognitive functions individually. I'm not going to go into each type yet. That's going to be in the future. But for now, let's get into the cognitive functions. Another disclaimer is that this video is going to take a lot of time. As you see, it's probably an hour and a half long. I'm going to estimate that right now. It's going to be about an hour and a half long because I tend to digress and go off tangents a lot. It's kind of like a little episode of a podcast or such, which I also am planning on doing in relation to the MBTI as well. But this is going to be a lengthy video, so please make time for it. I am not good with simplifying things and putting things down, cutting them down into a simple, brief idea. Okay, I cannot do that. I have to go a little long on this one. So let's start where the MBTI really came from. So you can't really study the MBTI well if you really don't know where it came from. All right. So on the left here, this is Catherine Briggs. All right. She is the mother of Isabel Briggs right here. And she was born around 1860s, I believe, 1870s, and died in the 1960s. And I believe Isabel died, I think, in the 90s. I'm really not sure. But anyway, in the 40s, all right, during World War II-ish, or after World War II, she studied, Catherine Briggs studied the, well, she looked at data from studies of contemporary children's educational and social developmental theories. And as my sources state, she created a vocation test for children as she saw this as a key to a child's future happiness and well-being. So her earliest research led her to identify four main personality types. All right. So those were the temperaments like EXXX, IXXXX, but we'll get into that. Well, not really. That's a little complicated. But anyway, they developed this MBTI system. All right. But they used, or I mean, mostly Catherine Briggs used the psychological type system that Carl Jung has developed, which are also known as cognitive functions. All right, he is a Swiss psychologist and quite a little bit controversial as far as I can remember. But still, the MBTI is a great system. Uh, he did not, Carl Jung did not develop the MBTI system. In fact, he had no idea that the MBTI was a thing because it was actually named out of Myers-Briggs type indicator from her. All right. Now, I'm going to be honest, I'm not really well educated on the complete history of this, so I may be wrong, but in other words, they developed the MBTI system. He developed the actual underlying meanings of these cognitive functions from his book Psychological Types, which uses a lot of jargons, so don't jump into it immediately if you're interested in the MBTI. All right, so what are these cognitive functions? All right, so Jung's cognitive functions, right? He these rules that Catherine Briggs, well, actually no, she did not develop them, but they were developed to create 16 combinations forming the MBTI system. All right, this is a very sophisticated way of making these combinations to form the MBTI types. All right, it's not as simple as saying, are you quiet or outgoing, or are you abstract or detailed, or are you a thinker or a feeler? No, it's really, really more detailed than that. And that's kind of where the complications come from. People don't understand the MBTI, so they go against it, which is very common to see people doing everything. With any topic out there, people are going to disagree with them 50% or actually 80% of the time. That was an understatement. 80% of the time because they don't understand it. All right. And it's easier to go against something you don't understand than to go for something that you don't understand. All right. So these are the four functions. All right. These are mainly, these are the main functions of the MBTI. It's just thinking, feeling, intuition, and sensing. It's pretty simple. I can literally go down and skim it from now and then end the video, but that would be very, very oversimplified because there's a lot more information to know about these. So included, here's one step that you might not know. Thinking and feeling are judging and decision-making functions, and intuition and sensing are perceiving and gathering information. functions. And that's important to know because whenever we're actually building the stack, which you will understand later, when we build the stack of your unique combinations of these functions, and we turn out with a type out of one type out of the 16 functions, I mean types, sorry. Like if we put these into a list in order, like 4, and we have to make a type out of that. Okay, knowing which is judging, which is perceiving is very important. All right, I should have said that more simply. See, that's why this might be a long video. So, thinking and feeling are judging and decision-making functions. This is how you manipulate the world. All right, it's not always about what you necessarily create or make. It's just how you make decisions. Because everyone, both thinkers and sensors, all right, they both use judging and perceiving, all right, just differently. And that's what the MBTI is mostly preferences. Oh, and perceiving and gathering information is basically about experiences. So you're just looking at the world, looking at patterns, studying those, etc. So why categorize the two? Why would we categorize these? All right. So judging and perceiving, all right, they were added to explain how people approach the outside world. So there's another way to see it. Judging people tend to be more organized because they are typically more manipulative, not in a negative sense, like they're not going to gaslight you, but they're manipulative because they enjoy at least using their decision making to see see tangible differences because of themselves, right? Okay, and perceiving people, all right, they're more flexible. All right, they aren't going to stick to a schedule completely. If there's something a little better, they might choose that option on the dot. So on the spot, so they might not be as reliable in terms of scheduling, but they are typically seen as a little more easygoing, right? A little more chill. So how does everything add up into this 4-letter mess? Look at this. What it like look at the like how in the world, okay, that wasn't even all of them. All right, so first, before we get into that, actually, we'll just get into the cognitive functions themselves. And this is going to be very important for the framework of understanding the MBTI. So the meaning of these functions, all right? Judging functions. These are the judging functions, and from earlier, you should know that that is thinking and feeling. All right, these are the decision functions. Now we'll start with thinking. So I implemented some images here to help out, but basically thinking is just a logical function that people use, that thinkers use, to explain what's going on from the world into their brain, and then it translates into how they want to fix it, what they want to make out of what's in front of them. And instead of just making it based on what they want, they use it in a thinking preference. So, Einstein and Napoleon, very different people, very different people. But they were both thinkers, both dominantly thinkers. And we'll get into the dominant and auxiliary, but I will say dominant a lot. That basically means the primary function that you use. Because we all use 8 functions, however, there is 4 functions that we use mainly. And then 4 shadow functions, which I will not get into yet. But the 4 main functions are going to put into 2 main functions, which are the first and second, and then the first being the dominant and second auxiliary, and then we'll get into the latter. But anyway, Einstein and Napoleon were very different, and I'm going to go back to this slide after I explain all the thinking types, because there's only 2 branches, all right? Every function has two modes. All right, there's extroverted thinking, and then there's introverted thinking. Extroverted feeling, extroverted intuition, extroverted sensing, and then introverted sensing. All right, TE will mean extroverted thinking, NI means introverted intuition. You get the idea. All right. So there's two modes of thinking, and we'll get into both of them. In other words, Napoleon was an extroverted thinker and Einstein was an introverted thinker, and I'll get back into that afterwards. And I'm not sure what's going on with France here. I don't know why I added this, but I believe this is like an extroverted thinking thing because of strategic patterns. I don't even 1704, 1705. I don't even know what's happening here. It looks like divide and attack. I don't know what they're doing. I don't. Anyway, all right. So introverted thinking. All right, this is my second function. This is my auxiliary function, if you're curious. They focus on internal logic, consistency of ideas, and prioritizes accuracy. So they are going to make sure that everything is accurate in their brain. And they don't care if everyone understands or no one understands. They just care if they understand what's going on. If somebody say that you're chilling inside of a nice cool room with AC in it and someone barges through the door, kicks it down, and screams, "There is a pink giraffe flying at Mach 4 in the sky." The introverted thinker will immediately question that person on the spot. They will be like, "What in the world are you talking about, you sick freak? There is no way a pink giraffe is flying in the sky at Mach 4." They will not believe it because it is not consistent to the ideas of the world, of the laws of the universe, because there's no way a giraffe can fly, first of all. There's no way a giraffe can go even that high in the sky. I'm talking about in the atmosphere where it can burn up. And there's no way a pink giraffe can go Mach 4. I mean, Mach 4 as well. Like, what in the world? What could happen? But the thing about introverted thinkers is that they will not. Now, some of them will not immediately deny it, which is very interesting because they are very curious individuals and they might be like, okay, it's possible. It won't make sense, but it could be possible because nothing is impossible. That's kind of their quote. All right, their strengths are they are excellent at analyzing and understanding complex systems. They are super good with understanding complicated, like a complicated network within some sort of system. So think of a computer, right? They are really good with understanding how this component affects the other component. You know, how does the heat sink dissipate the temperature of the computer? Or how does the motherboard actually, how does it become a motherboard in the first place? What constitutes that? Or how does the battery reserve power or whatever it is? They are really good with understanding what's going on the inside because they don't just skim on the surface, they go deep and deep and deep into theory, and that's the introverted thinking uh way of life, I guess. All right, they independently seek truth and understand through reason, so they never go off of gut feelings. Okay, they almost never do that. All right, in fact, by they I'm talking about dominant introverted thinkers. They Now, okay, let me rephrase that. By dominant, there's no such thing as a submissive function. Dominant means primary, main in this context, all right? Not like an attitude, all right? Because dominant and submissive, those are like animalistic attitudes. We're not talking about that. That's a different psychological framework. But this is talking about the main function, all right? So main TI users. That's a dominant TI. That's Dom TI. All right. They are going to use logic almost all of the time or as much as they actually can. So long they're healthy. So healthy meaning like they're not, messed up in the mind. So they focus on logical consistency and accuracy in thinking. All right, and they value accuracy over efficiency. So they question the why about almost everything. So they're going to question almost everything that there is to be. All right, they're very well, not very abstract, but they're very systematic. All right, their brain works like a machine that no one will understand. It's like AI. It's like I don't even know how you know this, but it knows why it knows that. It's really interesting, right? But like all types, all right, they have weaknesses. So they can get stuck over analyzing things because of their introverted thinking. All right, it goes out all over the place. They can be seen as scatterbrained, especially INTPs. They can get stuck over analyzing stuff. All right. Uh, they have a higher potential to dismiss external inputs more often. So, in other words, if something comes from the external world, someone tells him that this pink giraffe going at Mach 4 is possible because of the theory of metaphysical quantum implications from religion or some nonsense like that. Now, I wouldn't even understand that. They would not care if they said that the pink giraffe was flying because an airplane or rocket ship hit it. They do not care whatever. They will have to see it themselves. They have to make the formula themselves. They have to write down the answer themselves, all right? They're not going to let anyone else do the math for them. So that is a weakness for them. They could obsess over details a little bit too much. So yeah, they can go off on the tangent a little bit. I'm mostly talking about intuitive thinkers. Now, sensors, I'm not too sure. I don't think they really go crazy about tangent or digressing, but they really do obsess over details just as much because introverted thinking wants to know at least almost everything in some framework. They have a higher potential to dismiss or ignore emotional considerations. So, by higher potential, that does not guarantee anything, but still, they have a higher chance that they are going to ignore emotional considerations. So, if someone is mad because they don't want to do something and it hurts their feelings, all right, they're not really going to care. They're going to be like, well, this is the most logical way we can do this. And this is just the way we should. So let's do it. Let's try it out, right? That's kind of a general thinking attitude. Now that kind of aligns more with TE, um, not TI, but it's kind of similar, okay? Because they're both thinkers, so you can kind of put them together like that. All right, now extroverted thinkers. All right, finally we get to the crazy type. A lot of people will say extroverted thinkers are extremely strict. All right, more times than not they are, but that is not the only thing about their function. All right, yes, they are extreme challengers and leaders. Not challengers, they don't really challenge ideas too much, but they do take lead a lot and they do focus on systems. And by systems, I mean outside systems, groups of people specifically. So they organize the outside world for maximum efficiency. So they care a lot about efficiency. That is their word, efficiency. Right? Introverted thinking, they do not care about what's efficient. They care about what's right. They care about the truth a lot. Okay, you're going to see a lot of introverted thinkers typically are like conspiracy theorists. All right, don't think of them as like complete geniuses because first of all, that's a stereotype. A personality type cannot be a genius, okay? Not in the MBTI system. However, they're more prone to be, of course, like Einstein was an introverted thinker. Newton was an extroverted thinker. He was an INTJ. Einstein was an INTP. But anyway, um, they care about efficiency, so they don't care about the logic or the crazy nonsense going inside of the head. They just care about what works, and if it works, let's implement it. All right, their strengths are prioritizing strong objectives over boundlessness. They hate boundlessness, all right? You don't want to go up to an extroverted thinker and just start going off of the tangent of what could be possible in this case or what could, you know, a pink giraffe flying in the sky. They won't believe it no matter what. You cannot give them logic, okay? At least an introverted thinker might be a little more open minded to that, but an extroverted thinker typically will just completely cut it out and they might even slaughter you over it. All right? They might slaughter you over it. That means that they will literally be like, yo, bro, you are dumb. That does not make sense. Get back to work. Do your thing, okay? Go to bed, okay? They are very, 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 like, oh my God, not strict, but yeah, strict, okay? They're strict on strong objectives. And this is almost all of the time because like there's no other way to put it. If you are not very strict on strong objectives, getting stuff done, you know, cutting out procrastination, they do procrastinate, okay? Because they're humans. But if you are not actively seeking to help your procrastination and you typically don't take charge, then you're definitely not extroverted thinking dominant. Okay, you might be auxiliary, but that's still a lower chance. They will take charge when the time calls, or I mean, whenever the opportunity is open. Okay, so they make decisions quickly based on external data. Think of statistics without the formula. Okay, there's a lot of formulas in statistics. Okay, they don't really care so much about the nitty gritty, oh, standard deviation and the mean and all this nonsense. They care about, do the statistics say that this is positively correlated or negatively correlated? They don't care about the residuals or the standard deviation or all this nonsense about the normal distribution. They care a lot about the results. And I use the statistics as an example because it's a really good way to put it. Statistics uses both, well, I mean, statistics in and of itself is both kind of extroverted thinking and introverted thinking kind of thing. Obviously, it's a part of math, so it is a thinking thing because logic correlates with math. Feelings, not so much. Obviously, there's no math in feelings. Okay, like what's the formula for, depression, right? Doesn't make sense. All right, valuing productivity, measurable results, and practicality. They will value things being more productive instead of just slow and abstract. Like an INTP, sometimes ISTP, could just sit down and just think for hours, thinking, this is the truth, and I like the truth. And they're like, bro, what are you doing? Get up and go to work, you know? They value productivity a lot. So this is kind of like think of it like a father, right? Because if you think of a regular male American father, you'll think of probably someone who's an extroverted thinker. Now, probably not dominantly because they're not as crazy as other dads of different cultures. But think of like a father, like they care about your grades or, you gotta be a good kid, right? That's what extroverted thinking is, okay? They care about productivity, measurable results, practicality, things that make sense. Flying giraffe, they wouldn't even have that thought in their mind. If someone screamed that, they would not even care because there's no way that's true. They just know. There's just no way that's true. Whereas, like I said, introverted thinkers, they might be like, okay, it's possible. I'm not gonna deny everything. All right. So they focus on organizing the external world for efficiency, clear goals, and measurable results. All right, very easy way to put it. Now, they also have weaknesses. So they can be overly blunt and seemingly controlling. So they're very bossy. They're not going to take into account how it makes you feel, their leadership, so much, because what's on their brain, what's on their mind the whole time is what the goal is. If the goal is to have, say, we need like like think of like military, right? Okay, military is a good example. Military officers manage stuff a lot. They that's kind of their only job. In most cases, they manage like enlisted personnel. They manage people. Okay, that could be mostly logistics or that could be supplies, basically the same thing. Okay, but why I'm using the military as an example because they like to control. Okay, military is a big control environment. So things are being controlled all the time. And that is their weakness is that they can be too controlling because they only care about the goal. They usually prioritize efficiency over anything. So getting work done instead of their personal feelings. Now, I'm not talking about in a work case, I'm talking about every day. they're probably going to dismiss their own personal feelings more than they dismiss people from a job from being too dumb. Because especially the dominant users, because their personal feelings, which is introverted feeling, is inferior. So they prioritize their efficiency of the goal. Okay, I'm going to repeat myself a lot because it's kind of what this whole thing is. Higher potential to dismiss out of the blue and abstract ideas. So if something is abstract, like what if I painted a big tank and this tank had a smiley face, and then we built a real life tank that had a smiley face, and the smiley face can move, and then we can make a show out of that. We can make a book out of that. They'll be like, bro, smiley face tank, get out of here. They don't care. They do not care about things that are just out of the blue or too abstract. Um, they want it out. They want the details and the simplicity of what we need to do, and then boom, they get it done. And then they tend to overlook the details as well, so they're also in favor of the big picture. There's a difference between abstraction and big picture. Big picture is just overall, abstraction is just going off on a tangent. Feeling. All right, so let's go back. This feeling is very fun to talk about because it's not boring and like thinking is, in my opinion. So, Einstein and Napoleon. Napoleon, he was an extroverted thinker. If you pay attention, you probably know what that means. He was obviously a military general, and I think he was the Emperor of France. So, he was a very big leader, okay? Very big leader, and he got stuff done. Einstein, on the other hand, wasn't so much of a leader. You don't see him as like a general, right? He's more of a thinker. He's a very, very smart and clever, intelligent guy because he was just a renowned astrophysicist or whatever he was. Okay, so that's why, um, and now that's kind of why like introverted thinkers are seen as scientists, and then extroverted thinkers are seen as leaders or military generals. So finally, feeling. Now, why feeling is so fun to talk about is because it's so fun to just dismiss the stereotypes. That's like the only reason. There's so many stereotypes about feeling. And I'm not a user of any feeling function. I mean, use it, yes, but as a third function. It's okay. So that is extroverted feeling in my end. But anyway, all right, feeling is all about just living your life, managing and prioritizing your emotions about stuff. All right, measuring your feelings. That is kind of a feeling thing. Okay, see, sad, normal, happy, right? They like extrovert feelers, especially. They like to manage that. They care about peace. So you see the protesters are typically feelers. And then we have Edgar Allan Poe up there. He's an INFP. I put him there because he's obviously an INFP. That's a good example. Um, and I forgot what that monument statue was. It's not this though, because this guy is kind of gloomy, right? You can kind of tell he's looking down. His hand is on his forehead. He's kind of sentimental, right? And then we have this. So feeling, okay, you get the idea. Uh, I like this image a lot because it doesn't only show that they're stupid, but they manage their heart in their brain in some cases because it can be a very um, they can be pretty smart and intelligent. Okay, so we'll start with introverted feeling. So kind of remember this is the judging functions that we're in, so they're going to be a little bit similar. An INTP and an INFP are surprisingly very similar on the inside, especially. So introverted feelers, they focus on internal values, emotions, personal beliefs, etc. So they're going to know very strongly what is right and what is wrong to them. They do not care what society says is right or wrong most of the time. They're going to care about whether or not their independent individual self actually sees this as a positive value or a negative value. They can handle their emotions in a very unique way and they're usually not going to let anyone else get in the way of that. So they might seem closed off with emotions and feelings. Their strengths are they are deeply in tune with personal values and emotions. Like I just said, they are very deeply in tune with them, especially the dominant ones. That's what I was trying to. That's the point I was trying to make. They have a strong sense of being authentic. All right. Feelers in general want to be authentic because they are more human. Okay. Now I'm not going to go off a stereo like an ENTP is typically seen as a devil's advocate who does not care as much for others' opinions on stuff or others' feelings on stuff. Okay, well I will say this, like I'm a human and I do feel feelings. Okay. It's not like the last time I cried was, the Great War of 1817, whatever. No, like no, no, okay. Feeling is apparent in everyone, but people use it differently. I don't use feeling anywhere close to dominantly. So that's just my end, but that doesn't mean that I am not empathetic. Okay, that's just a stereotype, even though I might not have as much empathy, right? But feelers in general have a strong sense of being authentic. Whereas thinkers like myself, for example, I don't really care. Okay. If I'm different or not, I want to make my point clear. I want to just put whatever I want out there because it's fun. Okay. Empathetic and sensitive to other people's feelings while still making decisions that align with personal beliefs. Okay. This basically means that they can kind of feel other people's feelings. So, like, an introverted feeler is a little more one-on-one connected rather than connected with a group of people. So it makes their feelings seem stronger, and in some case, that can actually make them seem more empathetic than extroverted feelers, and you'll understand the shock of that when we get to extroverted feeling. So they guide decisions based on internal beliefs, and they have a very strong sense of individuality. All right, they kind of hate being a robot. They find it insulting. All right, and this function is quite sensitive with hearing criticism in some cases. They don't take the logical, objective point to heart, but to the brain, I mean. They bring it to their heart. So they're kind of like, dude, you just said that I'm a slow person. That's so mean. You're so awful. My values say that that's you should never say bad stuff up to other people, and that was a bad thing. So I hate you and might block you. Or they also might donate $4 million to charity every week. Okay? They are very different people, very interesting people, but they are not crybabies. Crybabies, I call them, not crybabies. They are not crybabies. Because every human is a crybaby, but not a crybaby. There's a big difference. Weakness. Okay, they can be overly focused on personal feelings. So, you put them in a room where everyone's crying, they're probably going to be the one crying as well. They're probably going to be crying with them as well. This doesn't mean they're very soft. I mean, yes, they are on the inside, but truly they can be really hard people. Pretty hard logic people as well, because everyone uses logic just differently. All right. Higher potential to struggle with expressing emotions to others. So this is a big thing. You can really easily tell when someone has this, either dominant or auxiliary as well. But if they have introverted feeling in their stack, don't expect them to be very open with you. Because an introverted feeling, especially as tertiary, think of INTJs, ISTJs, they do not go out with their feelings. Goodness, they leave it at home. But it's like Bluetooth, okay? It's watching it from a webcam from their eyes. They can they can feel things from home. But anyway, yes, they will not talk about it. They will not express it. Surprisingly, this even the dominant ones, the dominant introverted feelers, they might not express anything, and it's kind of annoying. It's like, man, just tell me what's going on, and they're like, no. And there's an actual reason, because Introverted feelers, they are very sentimental with their past. And they actually feel more nostalgia than introverted sensors, and you'll understand that over the video. Along with the video, I mean. But not only are they super nostalgic, but they also have a fears. They have very stronger fears. I'm sorry. They have stronger fears. All right. So if in their childhood their parents neglected them, right, and kind of made them feel left out, just like I don't know what's going on with my family. I'm not. It's like not even. I'm not even a part of them, right? They can feel like sad about that, and then they tell someone, and then that someone was a bully. They happen to be a bully, and then they are like, haha, they go out to school telling that they feel left out. And then their whole life they feel scared to be vulnerable. That's the main reason why they don't express it, because they use a strong sense of nostalgia. And we all, as childhood, has some bad experiences with feelings, but they tend to really take that to heart. And that's why they tend to be quite afraid of seeming vulnerable. So they do not express emotions that easily. Understandable, but not relatable to me. May seem aloof or distant, disconnected, especially during hardship. Very close to thinking, because introverted thinking is also very aloof and distant. I mean, they are a JI, meaning a introverted judging. So they have a way to kind of maneuver the world, kind of get through it like a game, but also it's like you look like you're like sleeping with your eyes open, man. They tend to zone out a lot. All right, so very idealistic. Oh goodness. INFPs are known as dreamers. ISFPs are known as artists. Do you see either of those making things like a factory production line happen? Not so much in my opinion. However, it can happen. Yes, it can. Don't yell at me in the comments. Of course it can happen. But they're very more, I mean, they're more idealistic with things. They are all over the place, man. They want something to happen. They're in their head all the time. All right. So the disclaimer is pretty important. All right, they're not selfish, cold, unrealistic, uninvolved, or sensitive. They actually are pretty sensitive. I don't know why I put sensitive in bold, but they are pretty sensitive. But it is commonly stereotyped. So they're you know you get the disclaimer here. I don't completely agree with what I put. Um, because I now that I think of it, I mean, like, if they weren't, um, say, if they were not sensitive, then that means they are probably unlikely to be an introverted feeler, because introverted feelers are sensitive to other people's emotions as well. But I did not take that into consideration when I made this at 4 in the morning. Extroverted feeling. This is my third function. Now, why I say that is because if you align kind of the way I act, because I'm acting very authentic to you guys, I try to be, you'll kind of be like, okay, this is how the third function works, whatever. You make your own theories. They focus on understanding and prioritizing the emotions and needs of others to create harmony within a group of people. In other words, big social group. I'll explain that later. All right, their strengths are that they are excellent at understanding and empathizing with others' emotions. Okay, they are really, really empathetic. uh, Extroverted feelers will take charge like extroverted thinkers do, but they will prioritize and take charge of the group's feelings. So if morale is low, or if people are scared, if people are sad or happy, even, they will feel it immediately, because they are very good at feeling the vibe, especially if they're intuitive, which we'll get into that. But They're naturally inclined and skilled at fostering harmony and maintaining a positive relationship with other people. So uh, they are really good with emotional maintenance, checking up on you. How are you doing? What's going on? You know, how things are in general, basically, like with feelings. So that could be if someone is just depressed, right? They affect the whole group. They want to make sure the group is okay. Now, I say that because they typically aren't super focused on individuals, as they are extroverted judges, and extroverted judges do not naturally hone themselves to individuals unless it's like their partner or something. They're gonna really care about the overall function and uh yeah, function. All right. And another strength is that they are attuned to social dynamics very well. They can understand the mood of the group around them. So like I said, they are able to adapt to others' needs. So like based on the vibe of the room, right? You put them in a room and the crowd is crying. The crowd is sentimental. They know how to kind of blend themselves into that. They know how to feel the group's feelings. If morale is low, no, they're not going to have a low morale. They're going to know how to fix that because they're just naturally good with that, right? We all have natural strengths. We all have natural intelligences that are, you know, tuned into our brains, right? Okay. So overall, they are focused on connecting with people while expressing feelings externally. They're being fond of discussing them and visibly empathetic. So they externally express feelings. So, like I said, remember when I said introverted feelers, they typically don't share feelings, struggle with expressing emotions, right? Extroverted feelers are the exact opposite. They do focus on expressing feelings externally. That doesn't only mean art, but that literally means talking it out like a counselor would. Really cool, right? So that's because of their natural extroverted attitude, which is associated with their function up here. All right, so I'm going to explain a little more about extroverted feeling and introverted feeling after the weaknesses part, and I want you to pay attention because this is pretty important. So the weaknesses of extroverted feeling, they can prioritize other feelings against their own so much that it leads to burnout. Burnout's really important in the MBTI because there is actually a phenomena that happens when a type has burnout. They can switch up their personality to their weakest function in the main stack, that is. All right, and I'll explain more into that later. That will be called the inferior function if you're curious. Higher potential to completely avoid conflict in order to maintain harmony. So they can completely avoid conflict. Despite their attitudes as a mediator, they can also just completely ignore it. So I'll go more into that in detail, obviously, like I said, but they they aren't oh my God, they're not like Mother Teresa, okay? They're not going to be perfectly tuned in to everyone, even though that's what this is. I mean, I would say Hitler used this function as a second function. He was an INFJ. Crazy, right? Anyway, sorry. They could neglect personal values, leading to a very bad relationship with themselves. So the same as the first point. They can just completely neglect their personal values. So they're like, I don't even know what my values are because I've been helping these people do this or blah, blah, blah. So they can have a very bad relationship with themselves in that case. And when unhealthy, they can be one of the most manipulative functions. So a social status could become similar to a religion to unhealthy FE DOMs. So, in other words, people who use this function dominantly or mainly, they will care about social status more or just as much as a religion. Their reputation is extremely important to them because what are they without the group? This function is literally only focused on the group. So if you're an introvert, right, but you have this as your first or second function, you're going to have a little part of you that needs to be around people because naturally that's what the extrovert feeling function is all about. People. So you can read this if you want. This is basically what I explained a little earlier. But what I want to make clear here is something about the differences between the both, okay? And oops. And I tend to draw a lot. I like to visually put things out. Oh my god, that's ugly. Wow. It's slanted because I'm right-handed. See what I mean? Because my mouse, it goes down. And I think it's my polling rate or something. Anyway, whatever. Computer nerds will know what I'm talking about. Let's do FE or no, FI. And I like to draw it out and it will make sense to you. Trust me. FE. All right. FI. And this is about empathy, okay? This drawing is all about empathy. Empathy. And I'm going to draw out visually how their empathy functions. So say that you are the user here. This is the FI user. This is the introverted feeling user. Okay, they're a nice star, filling in, very nice, pretty. All right, that's them. They don't really care about big groups. Think about it. They're an introvert. Okay, that introvert right there, I, means that they really care about more like smaller, nice, simple groups of buddies or whatever. Okay, they don't want a whole crowd. If someone has a conflict with, say, they have a conflict, A and B, person A and person B have a conflict, they are really good with mediating this. So they can get rid of that conflict between them, and the whole group is nice and happy. This is a heart, okay? The whole group is nice and happy. However, with extroverted feeling, their empathy works a little differently. Okay, imagine the user is standing right here, and this is the crowd. I shouldn't hear. Dot, 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 dot. This is the crowd. Every dot, every line, whatever I drew. That was really bad drawing. This is their ideal group of buddies, say. All right. They're going to have a few close friends here and there. They're not as important. All right. Say this person right here. I'm going to put it in a different color. Say person green. Person green has a problem with person blue over here, right? They have a hey, you suck, right? They hate each other. The extroverted affiliate leader might not care about them. You remember what I said about the getting rid of conflict? No, man. They're like, get out of my group. Boom. No hard feelings. Good vibes. Because they care about the whole well-being, the entire well-being of everyone. Not just like 3 or 4 people, like everyone. So if there's 2 people having a problem, why would they bother caring if the whole group matters more, right? That's why they're typically seen as more empathetic because they're really easy to express their emotions in that sense. All right. And especially their close friends, they could be really good with mediating problems with their close friends, but it's just not as well as introverted feeling, simply because there's a personal aspect to introverted feeling. All right, so I'm going to turn off the oops. I'm erase all. All right, so that is that. Um, let's move on. Okay, So now we are moving on to the perceiving functions. The perceiving functions is my absolute favorite to talk about because it is the most interesting. They are the most interesting. Um, and I do use a perceiving function as dominant, as extroverted, so it's more honed in towards the world. So let's start with intuition. All right. So this right here is going to be the most complicated cognitive function to explain for me. Intuition is what everyone uses, and it's how they objectively make sense of things without tangible facts. That is the most simple way to say it. How do they perceive the world without anything in front of them? Okay. Can this cat read your mind? No. But it's watching what you're doing. It's thinking, are you gonna come after it? Is that camera gonna shoot a bird that I can eat? Or is that camera gonna shoot an arrow or a bullet or just a flag that pops out? And it makes a boing, boing sound effect? No, that's intuition, you know? Or the deeper meaning, okay? Branching out. That's why I use this image, and then closing in. So that's introverted intuition, and we'll make more sense of this when we explain them. So this will be the most challenging to explain and probably to learn, and it does take time to learn this function. It took me quite a while. Introverted intuition. They focus on patterns, uncovering deep meanings, and envisioning future possibilities. So they are going to focus a lot on a lot of data points. They now perceiving functions are really interesting because they all tie together. Introverted intuition always ties with extroverted sensing. In that theory, it doesn't make sense, right? Like you think of an introverted intuitive dominant, they have it as their dominant function, but their inferior, which is their weakness, and we're going to get into that later, which is extrovert sensing. How in the world do they use extrovert sensing? They don't, but they use it in a they use it. They technically use the traits of it, and they both share a lot of traits, which is really interesting to me. Um, but I'll get more into that maybe later because right now you don't know what extroverted sensing is. So introverted intuition focuses on patterns, uncovering deep meanings, and envisioning future possibilities. Future possibilities. I should have bolded that when that bold. Because they aren't so much about possibilities, but more about uncovering the deep meanings and focusing on a conclusion. Concluding things from a bunch of facts. So their strengths, obviously, they have a strong ability to predict outcomes and future trends based on current data. Think of it like a gut feeling. This is probably the easiest mode of intuition to understand because that's basically what intuition is all about. It's predicting outcomes, uh, the future, um, maybe using the present and the past in some cases, but mostly the future. It's more future oriented. That's what intuition's all about. They have a natural ability to connect the abstract ideas into meaningful insights. So they are really, really like tough on just connecting stuff like boom, point A, point B, point C, point D. They can put it all together in a big line and then form a huge conclusion. And it's just wow, it's like holy moly. And that's how detectives work, and that's how AI works. But detectives usually work by a bunch of data points of evidence, and then they create one big conclusion out of all of that. If that makes sense, of course. Highly driven by a clear inner vision for the future. So they tend to plan, okay? Yeah. So they tend to plan a lot. Um, Especially the extroverted. So if you are an ENTJ or an ENTJ or an ENFJ, you use introverted intuition secondly. They are kind of less on the conclusion focus, but they're more on planning. Lots of planning. Plan, plan, plan all the time. That is their love. They could be writing an agenda for hours and they realize that they're been planning out their entire life because it's been like the year 3000, 2012, whatever, right? So they plan a lot. And they're very strategic, especially INTJs. They perceive the world through abstract patterns, underlying meanings, and future possibilities, often focusing on the big picture rather than the surface details. That makes a lot more sense because they are not very detail oriented as their intuitives, right? Intuitives are not detail oriented. They are big picture oriented. Sensors with an S, they are detail oriented. They are not big picture. They do not want the main idea. They want the details. All right. So intuition perceives the world through abstract patterns. It's almost always abstract. Their mind is always about something that usually is not very tangible and in some cases pretty fantastical. Their weakness is they typically overlook present details. So if something is very detailed in what's happening right now, they might just overlook it. They might just be like, so what? That's not a part of my big plan or big conclusion or whatever. Still, they can become stuck in overanalyzing the abstract. So in some cases, they can be kind of averted to the real world and the function of the real world because they are so abstract away from things, right? They can appear detached and overly mysterious to others. Very true. A lot of times on Personality Database, it is a website slash community of people who associate personality types, not only the MBTI, but predominantly the MBTI, to movie characters, real characters like Brad Pitt or Angelina Jolie or even Mike Tyson. They might associate personality types to Eminem or fake characters like Slim Shady. It can go all the way to video game characters. Like, I don't know, Spider-Man from the specific Spider-Man games. It's really funny to see. Not from the movie, but from the game. Somehow there's a difference between them. Freaking cool as heck. However, however, why am I going into this? Because there is a big bias in the MBTI community that the intuitives are smarter and just better than the sensors because they're more strategic. They're more like people who are more material, like material worldly, like sensors are. They aren't seen as much intelligent. They're just seen as like they're just like robots, right? But that's not always the case because intuitives can be quite dumb. All right, think of like people who try to predict the future. They typically have introverted intuition in there, but they just don't use it right. They believe they have like a big trait of theirs is to just predict things, and that's true. But it's not just because it's mystical. They actually predict things based off of subconscious data. All right. So that data is collected in their present world. They have a higher potential to struggle with explaining reasoning. So, um, like I said, the gut feeling, it's kind of hard for them to understand. So they won't express it or talk about it as well because they just don't really know. It's kind of subconscious. Now we'll get into extroverted intuition, my favorite, because this one is actually my dominant function. So it's kind of cool to talk about because it's probably easier to talk about for me. But they essentially focus on exploring new ideas, possibilities, and connections to those in the external world. So, in other words, these ideas branch out, and it's less of a conclusion and just more of digressing. All right. Big tangent. Right? Lots of digressing. And it can be kind of annoying for some people because that's just the most chaotic function. And introverted sensing has to kind of tone it down. Their strengths are that they are excellent at generating creative ideas. So, yeah, they can come up with really witty things. They're seen as jesters, ENTPs. So they can come up with kind of challenging ideas because of their introverted thinking, as well as witty comments or funny things because of extroverted intuition. Now, some people might argue, well, ESFPs are more like jesters because they're comedians and entertainers. Well, jesters aren't afraid to hurt people's feelings. ESFPs are they are skilled at seeing connections between seemingly unrelated things. Okay, extrovert intuition, that is. They're really good at just seeing connections in general because of an intuitive, as an intuitive function. That's kind of their thing. It's just to see connections between seemingly unrelated stuff. They're easily open-minded and pretty adaptable to new information. So you're not going to see them really stuck on an idea for very long. They will digress many times. That is an easy way to tell the difference between an extroverted intuitive versus an introverted intuitive, because I'll explain later visually. And lastly, they are energized by exploring new concepts and perspectives. So their energy comes from new things. In other words, novelty, for lack of a better term. They are always envisioning possibilities because this function is very innovative. They can branch out a ton. And I'll explain that about after the weaknesses. Okay, so they can struggle to focus on one idea or a project. Uh, so I could talk about something completely differently while I'm making this video, and I probably did a few times. Because just generally, that's just how we work. Okay, we cannot sit on a specific idea for very long because there's a lot of things in our head that reminds us of something completely unrelated. I was thinking about the smell of burnt food earlier while making this video, while explaining like how group dynamics work in terms of feeling. I don't know how I came to that. That's probably just something completely unrelated to intuition because there's really nothing connected between that. It's funny, right? Anyway, they tend to overthink possibilities instead of committing to just one. So they will overthink about what in the world could happen. In a relationship, I know what you think I'm going to say, but I'm not going to say it. Partners who overthink can be any type. Boom. I just put that out there. Extroverted intuitives, they do not necessarily overthink negative possibilities with their partners without any tangible spark. Say that, say that ENXP's partner, which is any DOM, their partner did not respond for 2 hours, and then they acted like it was nothing. They can overthink a bunch about that. They can overthink what in the world could have happened. They could have went out partying. They could have fell asleep. They could have got injured going to the hospital. They could have got their memory wiped. They could have been a completely different person texting back. They could be cheating. They could just be playing a game. They could just forget to answer. I don't know, just a bunch of stuff. And sometimes it's completely unrelated. So that's kind of their function. That's how they work. And I'm just saying that in a regular setting because they don't really truly overthink things that are just nonsense if they're healthy, that is. Because imagine like a healthy person does not always think about wrong things that go wrong without any reason, right? That's not what their function describes. That's not what the MBTI is for. Okay, it's not supposed to describe. Do you overthink in relationships? Like, no, that's kind of dumb. They're more prone to, maybe, but I mean, I personally, I'll tell you this, I don't. I don't. I do not overthink a lot. They could, no, let me rephrase that. I do not overthink a lot in relationships. I do overthink a lot of possibilities and other things. I just want to put that out there. They could become too scattered or disorganized in their approaches. So, like just now, I talked about relationships, right? So it'll be quicker if I tie this into what I'm doing now. Higher potential to overlook practical details in favor of exploring new ideas. Well, hold on. Yes, they do overlook practical details because they probably don't care about what the heck is going on. They just care about what could be going on. All right. They care about why all the time. Why? That sounds like a thinking thing trait, right? Not always. If someone's explaining a story, they just want to get to the point. Someone's saying, oh, this person beat up this guy because this guy cheated on this guy or this girl, and this girl was friends with this guy. And it's like, I don't care who this guy was or what happened. Just tell me why it happened, right? Simple. Not necessarily what happened, but why? What's the deep meaning behind this? How can this affect, you know, the economic state of our city? Like, how could this affect the school budget? Like, it's unrelated stuff. All right. Now, I'm going to explain before I get into sensing. I'm going to explain um, introverted and extroverted intuition quite simply. All right. Um, because visually, this will make a lot more sense. Let's do this. Well, hold on. Let's cut it like that. Boom. All right. I know it's bad like earlier. And then boom. Well, that was nice. Except this part. Whatever. This will be NE. This will be NI. All right. Extroverted intuition, introverted intuition. Let's change the color a bit. For extroverted intuition, well, let's start with NI actually, because this is what we started with. They have many points of data. Some are completely unrelated. And it's like, how in the world do I form a conclusion out of all this nonsense, man? Because look, there's ones here, there's outliers there. It's like, what in the world? A bunch of dots that are just basically events. Okay, think of these as events or experiences. They want to form a conclusion about someone, but they don't know what to do because without this, I'm sorry, without these points, they don't know what to think of them. So what they do is they use these events. This ties down to here. This ties to here, which goes here. This ties here. That ties there. Okay, this ties here. So they make conclusions for everything, and it's just, oh my goodness. It gets so crazy during their processing state. This is kind of how AI works. Okay, kind of. But I mean, I'm not an expert, I'm not a computer scientist, so I could not answer that. I'm not going to keep drawing that, but just imagine there's constant lines forming up, and then it all goes down to this full big boiling pot. It's a melting pot. Big idea, big conclusion right here. Boom. And then this right here, this big bubble is known as the gut feeling that you get if you understand how this is. I don't. because I don't really get gut feelings as much. But of course, as humans, we all use this function, so we have to in some case. That is how they arrive to a conclusion. They have multiple events that create a massive conclusion. Whereas any extroverted intuition, no, negative. They start with one event. Something happened. Cool. Guess what? What about this? This could happen too. This reminds me of this. This reminds me of this. Or this. This forms one. Guess what? This branches into 10 different points. This branches into 2, 3, 4. And it's crazy. They just have this insane ability to digress into seemingly unrelated topics because just these things just don't make sense to the normal person. So because this doesn't make sense to the normal person, why I don't know why I said that, but yeah. See what I mean? When I'm drawing, I can't really think about what I'm saying. That is how they work. They arrive at numero uno, and then they go down the list, and they go insanity, and they go down and down and down. Introverted intuition is more like the big idea of all of this. Extroverted intuition is quite the opposite. It literally just goes from the event all the way to nonsense. Instead of events, it's like possibilities. So that's how they work. They tend to digress a lot more often. All right. So at last, let us move to sensing. All right. As you see here, we have hearing, sight, taste, smell, touch. We have, I'm not sure why. I mean, this kind of makes sense. Not really. I don't know why I put that there. This is more related to introverted sensing. They are typically more traditional. So they appreciate religion a lot more. Extroverted sensing, they love parties. They like to go out, nightlife, really cool stuff, lots of lights, colors. History, um, I guess just the appearance of things, general appearances. They are sensors. This is the easiest, one of the easiest perceiving, well, this is the easiest perceiving function to understand. All right? Because they use their senses, but they use it differently based on if they are an introverted sensor or an extroverted sensor. So, introverted sensing, SI, they are like historians, okay? They focus on recalling experiences, valuing memory, traditions, and details to navigate the present. So, traditions, memory, details, they use them all to navigate what's going on now. What has worked before? What does the manual say, right? What does the rule book say? All about rules, all right? Especially STJs, all right? They're going to be really, really focused on the rules, how things are usually done. But still, either way, introverted sensors can be generalized a little bit easier because of this. They use details in terms of memory and tradition. Now, tradition, not so much, but more like childhood, all right? If they go to church every Sunday since childhood, they ain't gonna stop going to church. All right, easy as that. Mostly, um, most of the time. I mean, their strengths are that they are excellent at recalling details and past experiences. All right. Now this doesn't mean they have a memory of a demigod, all right, that knows everything that happened in their past. But because they utilize their memory so much, it keeps recurring in their brain. So because it keeps recurring in their brain, it's just like a constant. It's like fuel for them. So they are seen to have better memory and details for past experiences. If John got this specific cup of coffee, all right, he puts like half a cup of milk in his coffee and he likes to leave it cool for 3 minutes before getting it. All right, they can remember that. So if John is sick and they want to deliver a nice cup of coffee to John, this is unrealistic, but they want to deliver it to John. They're going to do the same procedure because they know how he does it, because they see how he does it, because they focus on the details and past experiences. So they're going to easily know what to do. Whereas someone with, say, extroverted intuition, they appreciate novelty a little more. So they're going to go to John's house. They're going to take him out to Starbucks and they're going to have him try a pinky drink. And they're going to give him like a chocolate mocha with a million different probiotics, cool tasting, nice, whatever, what in the world, ice cream, cake pop. They're going to give him a bunch of, like, what in the world? Poor John, because he hangs out with an ENXP. Instead of, you know what I mean? Anyway, all right. Another strength is that they prioritize stability and consistency. So they create reliable routines as an outcome. These reliable routines, like, you wake up at this particular time. You take a shower at this particular time. You leave for work at this particular time. You do that every single morning. It's going to be reliable. It's going to be reliable, and they're going to appreciate that a lot. Extroverted intuitives, they don't really care so much. All right. Think about it. They're the opposite. All right. This is my inferior function. I don't use it as much. I don't use it at all unless I'm stressed or tired or whatever. All right. But the deal here is extrovert intuitives, they don't really care for routine because they want novelty. All right. They want to go to McDonald's for breakfast. They want to go to Chicago for breakfast, whatever. All right. Whereas introvert sensing, obviously, remember routines. All right. Stability, consistency. They do love security a lot because they are also, as well, very family oriented, same as extroverted feeling. So if you pair that up, because they can pair up, ISFJ or ESFJ, they are very, very, very family oriented. All right. Deep appreciation for tradition and established methods. While also having a strong ability to notice and remember sensory details. So they do have a deep appreciation for the established methods of the world. What things or how things have worked before and why we should do things like we did in history. All right. Social Security Act, they're going to they want to keep that in. All right. They're more prone to keep things conservative, keep things how they were as long as they worked. Now, that can be pretty bad because if we get to the weaknesses, yes, they rely on past experiences. Yes, and they help navigate the present and future. Very true. But if we look into their weaknesses, that conservatism can lead to a much higher potential to resist change or new ideas. If something worked before, why in the world would they even care? Why would they give a rip about something new? This doesn't make sense because it could not work, it could be unreliable, it could be messy and dangerous and deadly. So why would they focus on it? Right? That's their weakness. And that's my strength. New ideas part, okay? But their weaknesses, all right, resisting those new ideas. Sticking to the established methods, tradition, rule book, all that. All right. They may struggle to adapt in unfamiliar situations. So things can get pretty unfamiliar in life. All right, you're going to end up in an alleyway or whatever, and it's going to be dark. It's going to be night. You're going to be like scared, all right? And they're going to be like, man, I never had this happen to me before. I don't know what to do. I cannot adapt because nothing has happened to me before about this. See what I mean? They have to break into an experience. So if they do it again and again and again, they can get really, really good with it. They can get really, really good with it. People who are in the Olympics and they do insane, crazy flips, it is not uncommon to find that they are also introverted sensors. Because of their very heavy stance on routine, just keeping things routine in general, they can be really, really good because practice is routine and practice makes perfect. All right. And extrovert sensors, they kind of just do it on the fly. If they're good at it, they're good at it. If they're bad at it, they're horrible at it. But I'll get into that later, after this one, actually. They over focus on the past, and that can limit their future possibilities. Um, if they get a job when they turn 22, right out of college, they're gonna stick to that job, man. They're not gonna leave. They're not probably not gonna leave it, and that's gonna like you're gonna see them in another 10 years, and they'll be like, dude, you're just the same. You look the same, same haircut, all right, same bed sheets, same dental routine, everything the same. It's like, man, what in the world are you doing? The only thing different is that he's got pictures of the past in his house, right? That's kind of the thing. They got pictures of memories and all that. That's the only thing different about that. They don't change nothing. All right, and they might overlook abstract or big picture concepts. I'm not too heavy on teaching this initially because anyone can be abstract or big picture. But just remember, sensors are more detailed, intuitives are more big picture. All right, abstract that can go for anyone, but typically sensors are just not abstract whatsoever because it does not interest them. They are more interested in the real world. And we're getting to our final function, which is the most realistic function, the most real world function, extroverted sensing. All right, this camera represents them a lot better than introverted sensing because they see the world and that's it. They just see it, man. They focus so much on engaging with the present moment. All right. They experience the world through vivid sensory details and immediate action. They do not want to just sit in bed, man. They want to go out and see the world. They are very, very, very high sensory people. They want to stick their feet in a warm lake and they want to listen to music or play guitar while they're doing that, while they're eating a cheeseburger with double bacon, double mayo, double mayonnaise, extra mustard, while they're watching the sunset. You know, they're just crazy. They're super indulgent, all right? They are almost always very much super indulgent. That word thing's really weird, but yeah, man. They are super indulgent with what's going on. So their strengths are they're highly aware of and responsive to their surroundings. You will not see them zone out very frequently because they see everything around them and they're like, "Oh man, did you see this? Did you see this crack in the corner?" You know, um, I'm like, like yeah, they might. Now the thing is about the dominant ones, the dominant users of extrovert sensing, they might not really be good with understanding the underlying meaning or possible future instances of what's going on in the present. So there's a crack in the ceiling, but they might not say like, "Oh, that crack might lead to the building collapsing." That's something an introverted intuitive would do. Cool, right? But they are quick to act and adapt in the moment. They're very, very, very adaptable. Throw them in anywhere, and they're actually energized by adapting to new things. So remember that that dark alleyway I was talking about that the introverted sensors would probably be into? Yeah, no. For extroverted sensors, they would like it. They would want that actually. They don't really care so much for novelty. Um, and I mean, if it's about sensory experiences, yes, lots of novelty is necessary. However, if something gives them a constant pleasurable sensory feeling, then it is likely that they're going to do it again. So skydiving, okay, that's kind of their thing. And don't think that they're just adrenaline junkies who have no fear. Okay, they have fear. Of course they do. I've had friends who are like ESTPs, ESFPs, right? Extroverted sensing dominance. They have actually one of the most fears is the ESTP type for doing that, and the less fears is ESFP. So there's a lot of nuances between types depending on their secondary function, which is really interesting. Anyway, another strength is that they thrive in dynamic and high energy environments. Parties, 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 parties all the time. They want to go to a party. They want to go to the lake at night, shooting fireworks in the sky. They want to do driving down the road really fast, go to space, right? They're gonna go to space sometime. You're gonna see them end up on Mars. They're gonna They're gonna have a party on Mars because Mars is too boring, not enough stuff to to sense, right? So they are always engaging with the present moment, embracing new experiences. If you use this as a first or second function, dominant or auxiliary, I highly doubt that you have it because this whole video is definitely not very easy for extrovert sensor to watch all through because they get bored the most easily. That's right, they get bored the most easily. So their weaknesses, they can be impulsive, prioritizing immediate action over long-term planning. They don't care what's going to happen in the next few weeks or whatever. They are present in the moment and they are going to do the most crazy stuff in the moment because that's where they're living. They don't live in the past or the future. They live in the moment. So they are extremely, like, extremely good at just, it's really cool, but they're just really good at just like noticing things that I had no idea about. And they're really good at reading people as well. Similar to introverted intuition, like I said. They can struggle with the abstract or future focused thinking. Yes, very much so because they are obviously a sensor, they're not intuitive. They're going to have a struggle with future focused thinking because, in fact, the dominant extrovert sensor has the inferior function of an introverted intuitive. All right. Higher potential to indulge in sensory pleasures so much that it leads to recklessness. They can be extremely reckless at times and they tend to get hurt a lot more often. And I know I said that they are not adrenaline junkies, but they are more prone to be. Yes, very much so. Because adrenaline junkies only want that adrenaline feeling, and that ties in with sensing. Okay, very simple. Tends to overlook deeper meanings or emotional subtleties. Yeah, deeper meanings. They're gonna see something, and they're gonna laugh at it. They're like, "Oh, that's a funny fact. That's a funny detail," but they don't really understand the deep meaning behind it, right? Same thing. Same goes with emotional subtleties. If there's some like emotional feeling behind something, and it's really hard for you to determine unless you've seen it before. Like I'm thinking of Anna here. They will not notice it, and they will only notice the physical present and what's going on now. And that includes like facial um features, facial mood changes. You can see their changes in their countenance, right? It's kind of how they work. This is a disclaimer at the bottom. So here is, oh, that was it for the functions actually, but I'm going to explain how these functions make these four letters. So if you remember from earlier, if we go all the way back, you saw a bunch of these, okay? How in the world, man? We talked about all those functions, but how do we know what type uses what, right? So that's why we're going to go here. How do these functions connect to these four letters? These are called function stacks, okay? For an INTP, their dominant function is introverted thinking, their secondary function is extroverted intuition. Their third preference, okay, their third function is introverted sensing, and then this is not their fourth preference, this is their final preference. They hate it. It's called their inferior function, extroverted feeling. In the same order goes for every other stack. All right. What the heck is going on? Easy to explain. All right. Here's how we're going to do it. I like green. We're going to do green. Let's do a type that's pretty easy to type. I mean, not to type, to put down. We'll do ENFJ. All right. ENFJ. You're not going to see an O or Y or W or a A in this because those are not part of the MBTI. It's only EI, NS, FT, PJ. That's only letters you'll ever see in the MBTI. Now let's determine the function stack. So they're called stacks. All right. stack. So their stack is going to look like this. Well, let's determine that. All right. So, uh, first thing we're going to do is look at the first letter of the type. In this instance, it is an E. All right, let's form four different spots, four different slots. We have the option to put an I or an E here. In this case, the first letter tells us this is an E, meaning they're extroverted, by the way. So E. The way the MBTI works is that after an extroverted function, there must be an introverted function afterwards. And it does matter what introverted function that is. But we'll get into that. It will be an I. Like I said, after the attitude, there has to be the opposite attitude. So it's an E again. And then obviously it's going to be I. If this was an I, we would begin with I, E, instead of E, I. All right. Now we got that done. We don't need to worry about this anymore because this first letter tells us what our dominant function is. And in this case, it's extroverted, meaning the user is an extrovert. Next, we look at the last letter. Not the second one, but the last one. The last one is going to tell us which function out of these two are extroverted. Remember from earlier, we said the intuition and the sensing, N or S, is the perceiving. They are P types, perceiving types. Feeling and thinking, F or T, are judging types. The last letter will either be a P or a J. In this case, it is a J, which means that carries the E to the feeling type because the last letter says what type is extroverted. So we have to start from the beginning. If it's an E, place the judging type. Easy as that. Now, say that it was an I, right? INFJ. We would have to skip this part because it would be beginning with an I. Because an INFJ begins with an I in the first letter, remember? And that means their dominant function is going to be introverted, then extroverted, introverted, extroverted. So they have to start with the N because that is the only introverted function that we have out of the two. Because NFJ means FENI. Okay. So the J, yeah, so that's going to be FE. So next, this will have to mean that N will be an I. So introverted intuition. And then that is the first and second functions. In other words, this is the dominant function, the most loved function, the most used function. And then this is the secondary function, or also known as the auxiliary function, which ties as like a sidekick, a supporter towards the dominant function, the secondary function. There's going to be a big split between these two in terms of behavior. Because us as humans, we use eight. Okay, there are only four here, but there are also shadow types, which I will not get into yet, or at all in this video for that fact. But we will use the dominant function first, initially as children, and then our secondary function will start developing, and we'll start using that as children, as as teenagers. Teenagers, yes, teenagers after around puberty. So how do we get these last two, and what do they even mean? Well, obviously, if we can count, we can do 3 and 4. Okay, this is the tertiary function, and then this is not the fourth function. It can be called the fourth function, but the MBTI system calls it the inferior function. And inferior means worse. Just for a general fact, it means just bad, worse. All right, relatively worse. So the third function will come from the second function. All right. We have the first function, the second function, and then we'll bounce to the third as well. But instead of using anything from here, we don't have any other letter to put. We have to put an S and a T somewhere. So all stacks, you'll notice, will use F, N, and then TS. In other words, they will use thinking, feeling, intuition, and sensing in some sort of order between extroversion and introversion. But anyway, after that, we will do the exact opposite of the second function makes the third function, okay? See, we already did that. The I and the E, they're complete opposites. The opposite of N in the perceiving category is going to be sensing. So that's S. That leaves us with SE as the third function. The inferior function will not be the opposite of the third function. Do you know why? Because the opposite of the third function is the second function. So how does that make sense? What we do next is we actually go to the dominant function. The dominant function, which will be extroverted feeling. The exact opposite of extroverted feeling is already put as an I, and the opposite of feeling in the judging category will be thinking. So this is our function stack. For the ENFJ, it will be FE, NI, SE, TI. That is that nonsense that we come up with, or at least what looks like nonsense. Let's do it again. This time we'll do it with an introverted type. I, S, T, P. All right? ISTB. What do we look at first? We look at the first letter. Is it an E or is it an I? In this case, it is an I. So with our four sections here, or spots, we'll begin with an I. All right, the rules say that we must do the exact opposite. So the second function must be extroverted. The third function must be introverted because the second is extroverted. And then the fourth must be extroverted because not only is the dominant introverted, but also the third. And you don't have to worry about that. I just overcomplicated it. In other words, it has to follow this sort of pattern. On, off, on, off. I, I, I. Okay? There's going to be no more after this. There's only 4 in the stack, but there are shadow functions which can be explained later, but I'm not going to do that right now. It'll make this video about 10 times longer. So ISTP. How do we find this? All right, well, we look at the first letter. We already got that down. Boom. Let's get rid of it. Now we have STP. With the perceiving letter at the end of this stack, or not stack, but the type itself, we look at and this says what is extrovert. Perceiving will always point to the second letter. Okay, you'll always have N or S in this spot, and you'll always have thinking or feeling in this spot after the perceiving. So remember the last letter says what is an extroverted function. All right, the function is obviously the letter. So that is going to say, hey, this S is an E. And remember, that means this has to be an I. All right, so that leaves us with that. So we have the S down. We have the sensing down as an extrovert. But the problem here is we're not an extrovert. In this instance, this type is introverted. So where do we put it? Because there's 2 spots now. Remember, follow the order. It starts with I. If it's I, okay, next. If it's E, next. Great. So then we'll put an S. That leaves us with the TI left, so we must put thinking there. Cool, we got our dominant function and our auxiliary or secondary function. 1, 2. Now remember, we need our third function and then our inferior function. Easily, we can just get that our E automatically converted to an I. The opposite of S is N in the perceiving category, so that will be SENI. Inferior will be the opposite of the dominant function. So that in this case will be feeling an extrovert because that is the complete opposite of this type, this function. So it'll be FE. This is the type, angry type. We don't like using this. Our third function, it's kind of childish. Okay? It comes out of nowhere. It's annoying. Our second is kind of our, it's very well known, it's playful, it's happy, it's cool. And this is our most favorite that we use the most. These two is what we use almost every day. And then our third will be kind of in junction, so it might be at nighttime. You might see it. And if there's any immediate stress, like your car almost got hit, you're going to resort to the inferior function almost always. So I explained the dominant, the secondary, the tertiary, and then the inferior function just there. And if you had any trouble with that, of course, there's a lot more resources out on the internet to learn about that. What do I do with this information? So you learned for about an hour, I'm going to assume, or more, a lot of information about every single function and how these types are created. But now what do you do? The MBTI is a great tool for understanding yourself. First of all, go ahead and find your type. From the information in this video, just go ahead and think about yourself. Where would you fit best? Then you would construct your type by simply putting those cognitive functions in those orders. Now, it might be kind of difficult, and I will tell you how again, but you have to choose what is greater than or lesser than used. So it's a great tool for understanding yourself. To find your type, say you resonate with SE and NE, and then FI, and then TE. Say you resonate with those. Out of these, what do you use the most? Say you say NE, okay, cool. Then you say TE. Well, we can't do that because see, there's an extrovert and introvert. I mean, extrovert and another extrovert. We can't do that. Say it's, same thing with extrovert sensing. You cannot have two in the same stack that are the same category. There cannot be perceiving and perceiving. It has to be perceiving, judging, or judging, judging, perceiving. Or no, actually in the middle it would be the same. Yes, it would be perceiving in the middle or judging in the middle. But anyway, I digress. The extroverted intuition, say is your first. Okay, cool. Now next it has to be FI. So FI, and then naturally TE will come after that. And then this cannot be your most used. So it has to become SI, and then you're an ENFP. You're just a very unique one. Okay, that's how you find it basically. If you have any questions, put them down in the comments. Okay, no problem. You can understand yourself. Oh, I'm sorry. You can understand others easier by knowing these functions apply to all people in different ways. Very simple. You can just understand how other people work by knowing these functions. Creating a better version of yourself by learning about your type's weakness and doing better at it. I corroborate this. I've noticed that I've become kind of a better person by realizing my strengths and weaknesses and improving on those. And it's pretty good information on an interview. You can kind of, tell them literally your type description. Oh, well, I'm creative. I'm a good brainstormer. I'm logical. You know. Anyway, next, the MBTI is not completely accurate. I'm not going to go over this. This is a lot of information. So an INFP, let me go on. So INFP can be a detective. They can be a jester. They can be the president of the United States, just as well as an ESTJ, which is the exact opposite of their type. And guess what? They as well can also be these categories. Okay? The MBTI is not a rigid label, but it's instead a way to understand your preferences and tendencies to do stuff and to see stuff. Any type can do anything. The only differences could be how they do it. All right. Now there is some probability factor in this. So some types have a lower probability to do things. So for example, an ISTJ, which is an SITE. Remember, SI is a function that is more secure and about the history and the past and routine, right? They're not going to be very likely to be climbing cell towers for fun, okay? They could do it, but they are just very unlikely to because of their natural function stack. An INFP is more likely, even though they don't even have extrovert sensing in their stack. So the MBTI takes a lot of studying and self-reflecting on how you perceive the MBTI itself. All right. So a recap, I or E, where you get your energy. So alone versus with others. Okay. Sensing for facts, intuition for patterns, thinking for logic, feeling for values, and then judging for organize, and then perceiving for being flexible. That would be all. Finally, thank you for watching my video. I know it's a pretty long video, and please make sure to keep an eye out for the new and upcoming podcast I'll be making about the MBTI and as well as a lot of other current events happening in the world. I will be posting a lot more frequently about gaming and other things, so don't just think that I'm going to be yapping about this stuff. Um, but anyway, yeah, if you are here now, it most likely means you either skipped the video or that you watched it all. And if you watched it all, thank you very much. I know it was a lot of my voice, but I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next video. Yep, or the podcast. All right.